but I wasn't leaving the tradition. I was like withdrawing from having gone too fast into something from probably previous life affinity that obviously was not working at this time. You know, it was not the era for it. And then this is interesting, more interesting than my personal thing. Then I joined what most of the American Buddhists behave like, who are mostly ex-monks, you know, from either Burmese or any other tradition. And they say, oh yeah, this is America. We don't need monks anymore. We need, like, you know, families, and people have to learn from women, which is all good, because we do need to learn from women. But, you know, it's like, we don't need monasteries and monks, you know. That's like, no, they're uptight, they're not, whatever. And I kind of joined that at first. I thought, yeah, that's right. And so we're cutting edge here, these ex-monks. But then I studied the history, and then I took a look, and then I was challenged by Seymour Millman. You might have heard of him. He was a Columbia sociologist and very activist, you know, prophetic, secular sociologist. And he, in some speech at one of those nuclear freeze things, I forget, around 1970, whatever it was, he said to the assembled crowd, it's great, you guys surround the Pentagon. Councilor Weinberger goes home, takes a break, takes a holiday on a weekday, and you put a stop to the traffic and so forth. But you know what? You're amateurs. You have day jobs. The war people have war jobs, and there's hundreds of thousands of them. And what do you have to really match the war jobs? They're going to go on and they'll make war because they have war jobs. You know, they make weapons, they do all this. And what are you people? You're amateurs. You're like, gotta go home and take care of your family. And then I realized, of course, he's right. What is the social institution in history that has ever successfully stood up to militarism? Royal militarism or any kind, presidential militarism, prime minister militarism, dictator militarism. When has there been, it's not the family. The family person, they come and say, oh, shoot your kids, or you join the army and you shall shoot somebody for me, you know. The family's too weak to stand against the government and the military. The only one in history is monks. Sometimes they also get co-opted in history, you know, and they join a crusade or something, you know, they become military monks. But mostly not. In Japan, sometimes you have some samurais. But mostly the monks don't, and the Asian people know this very well. When the Japanese in 1860s decided they wanted to fight back the colonialists, the first thing they did was they made all the monks in Japan marry. Nowadays, the Zen guys run around, I'm a Zen monk, and they have like 2 girlfriends and like 4 kids and an ex-wife. They're not monks, they're priests, they're ministers. They're ministers, you know, like they married ministers. They're not monks, right? So, historically, I decided and realized that the only social antidote to militarism in a society, which in America, if anybody was ever militaristic, it's America, a Rambo country, it is a monastic institution. Even dumb monks are somehow not fighting in somebody's army. And even as a corporate brotherhood, you know, they don't have children that can be threatened. They're willing to give their lives often to be nonviolent. I mean, they can be co-opted. But still, it's one institution that worked. And guess who invented it? Buddha. And then it followed in China, and then the Christians did it out of the Desert Fathers in Mesopotamia and Egypt and so forth. And most of the founders, Benedict, Bernard, they were all ex-military people. Basil, you know, in Turkey, they were generals.
Ignatius.
Yeah.
Oh, even Francis was in there.
Yeah, they were with Francis, I thought he was just, he was a yuppie.
No, he did this army thing
Oh, he
and got
did.
wounded.
Oh, right,
And-
okay, right.
Like you and me.
Right. So then Dalai Lama likes to tease me. He says, you are the most enthusiastic about monasticism ex-monk. But as a historical, sociological thing, and America needs, therefore, actually monasteries. And the Dalai Lama thinks so too, and he sent Tibetan monks to go and live in Gethsemane and other places, you know. And the nuns really liked it, but those 2 popes who didn't like you, they didn't like it. Because they didn't like the fact that, in spite of theology, I'm sorry about my allergy, it just popped up an allergy. They didn't like it. You know, the one thing that you can annoy a conventional Christian about is saying that we're similar. The last thing they want to hear, they want to be exclusively unique, you know, because you can't be saved without them. You know, it's just going to be the first circle there. You're good yogi, good Buddhist, you're not going to make it. right? Because of that exclusivistic thing. So anyway, that's the thing. So I don't feel I left the tradition, and I also have come to really admire it and love it. And I love the Christian tradition. Also, the Christian and the Buddhist tradition are really the only two that had serious monasticism. And I know it's not sexy monasticism, and it's not this and that. It seems really boring. In a way, it's a kind of militancy of peace. It's like it creates a peace army in a society that takes away human labor, and it takes away wealth, and it takes away land from the potential. The king is always a chakra, always wants to have an army and go and conquer some other king. That's what they do, right? Even our moronic presidents want to do that. So we need the monasticism, and it's good, But the lay people nowadays, of course, it is different in that in those days, in all those cultures, West and East, the agricultural base of the culture was such that mostly it was the monks who were educated, and therefore they didn't really try to teach the lay people confusing things like selflessness or mysticism or whatever, because they might get depressed and freak out. But now everybody's depressed already, and they're all overeducated, and they're upset about life. It is like gobbling down the Prozac.
Well, that's where I think we need to bring some of the monastic inspiration, if you will, or principle, into everyday life.
Absolutely.
So I think we have to move beyond the dualism, kind of the Piscean age of monks are here and everyone else is here,
Right.
and begin to blend.
Right.
And like my Starker talks about, he says if you've learned to let go and let be, you're always in the right place and at the right time. So whether you're alone in a monastic cell or in the marketplace, whether you're married or unmarried, so I think we have to kind of make the monastic thing more portable.
Yeah, that's true.
And far more available.
Yes.
And I think that that's kind of happening, where people are learning to meditate, and where they're learning to integrate their knowledge and their left and right brains, if you will.
Right.
And to tame the reptilian brain. I think that's at the heart of meditation, is taming the reptilian brain. And I think that's what we have to do as a species, or we're done. So we can't afford to have monks in monasteries.
Wasn't Merton also into the idea, although he went in and out a lot, like you, but wasn't Merton also aware that he had this thing about that he didn't want to be thought of as a monk as they were doing something useful for society. Although individually he would like to reach out and so on, but he had the idea that it was important for the society to support people who were sort of not productive, who were not into like industrialized way of mobilizing the population. If you don't produce something, you're worthless. And actually the individual's spiritual purification and development and self-transcendence it's just a value in itself, and they should be supportive of that. That's a really important thing in the Buddhist monastic thing too. The idea that a person who is not, the generosity of the society is expressed in helping the individual who wants to develop their individual evolutionary destiny. And actually, it is very productive for society and has many side benefits. But it should be approached as a sheer matter of giving up that free lunch.
Right, and it's not, as Merton repeated often, there's more to life than the useful.
Yes,
and
exactly.
Contemplation is essentially useless, but we need it.
Yes.
And society needs it.
Yes.
And we need people working at that.
What I really love, it's a weird karmic connection, is that the Buddha appeared in his mother's dream at the conception of his mother, at his conception in his mother's womb. He appeared to her in the form of a white elephant. which nowadays is a symbol of a useless thing. I mean, that's kind of woo-woo, isn't it?
White elephant.
That's really funny.
That's a good one.
Well, you both have answered the next question already, which was, I don't know if you want to add a specific thing briefly, but the next question was, how has your experience with your tradition affected your dedication to peace? I think you both have pretty well answered that, right?
Prophetic side.
Yeah.
Okay,
You have anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I love the line, one of my important brothers is Meister Eckhart, and he has this great line. He says, compassion is where peace and justice kiss.
Oh!
And I really like that. The peace isn't enough, there has to be the justice too. And Jesus didn't say, blessed are the peaceful.
This
He
is
said,
a big line of His Holiness that you have to get him up.
there you go. Jesus didn't say, blessed are the peaceful. He said, blessed are the peacemakers. So obviously you have to bring some peace to the table, but it's a job to make peace. And the job is about justice, and where injustice reigns, whether we're talking about us and the environment and climate change, going into denial and developing an entire political party, half of America who are in denial. I mean, it's just amazing to me. I was in Florida a year and a half ago, January, during the presidential campaign. It was a conference on the seas rising. And the leadoff speaker was a scientist, and he showed slides of Florida today. 10 years from now, chop. 20 years from now, chop, chop. 30 years from now, chop, chop, chop. No Florida. And here, at that time, there were 2 presidential candidates from Florida, Bush and Rubio, and the governor, who were in complete public denial about climate change. And I visited South Miami. There's 6 inches of water. That was before these hurricanes. You walk down the street. It's just unbelievable that we tolerate that the media doesn't talk about it. I didn't hear one question in the presidential debates about climate change, etc. So, that's just raw stupidity, chosen ignorance, denial, which is a real spiritual problem. Aquinas says people who choose to be ignorant of what is important are committing mortal sin. That means spreading a deadly virus throughout the culture. And our media are doing that, our politics are doing that, and that's just one example of injustice. The injustice toward our children and great-grandchildren are gonna, so what can I say? The struggle for justice is an issue of fire. Aquinas says, compassion is the fire that Jesus came to set on the earth. Now, fire is yang energy. See, we need that. We need, to me, the meditation part, the taming the reptilian, that's kind of the feminine energy. But we also need this warrior energy today, and women need it as well as men. But we have to clean up the meaning of warrior. We've confused warrior with soldier, which is absurd and perverse. But I think that's where we're at as a species. So this, where peace and justice kiss, I just really love that. Yeah.
Bob, do you have anything you want to add to that
yes, I do.
question?
That is that I want to repeat His Holiness's slogan, world peace through inner peace. And in the sense that 100 years ago, 200 years ago, we've had violent revolutions against unjust social systems. And unfortunately, the people who came out on top at the end of those revolutions, because they used violence to do so, became just as violent or more so than the previous order. So, Jesus and Buddha both said that, violence breeds violence, hatred breeds hatred. Hatred never puts an end to hatred. Only love puts an end to hatred. Or sometimes they say only non-hatred puts an end to hatred. And so I would say that, like I gave a talk at Occupy Wall Street, which they liked actually, and in which they did their thing, basically the tenor of the talk was it's really great that they were there, and I especially singled out for praise the sign that they were showing to the cops, which was, you guys are one layout from being on this side of the sign. Some of those cops liked it. They were smiling. But they were aware of that.
They got it.
And, but I was saying that the people up in the buildings on Wall Street there were more scared of them than they were scared of the people up in the building. and were like more isolated from life and more miserable. They could be on their third trophy wife and their second Long Island mansion, and they're still more miserable. And so we don't hate them. We feel sorry for them, but we oppose them and we resist them, but without hatred. Because we need a rebel. And I loved it, like the huge worldwide demonstration against the Iraqi invasion, which was maybe 40, 50 million people in Japan, Australia, and Singapore, and London, everywhere, which the media was trying to keep out of sight. And people were going to those demonstrations with baby carriages and balloons. They were not irate. They were not, of course there were a few black, like anarchists throwing a breaking window, which I think are pretty much sent in by to discredit them by the press, the blue media send them in mostly. And nowadays the Antifa thing, I think, is not a good thing. But they'll use that to discredit the whole resistance to Trump and so on. And so the inner peace means that we are capable, but what Buddhism helped me, what the tradition helped me to feel hopeful about and see, I do see the people of this world as way advanced to how they were 500 years or 200 or 100 years ago. And this holiness is positive vision, this via positiva, has helped me see that. And he has this wonderful thing of 4 points of hope, where he says that in around 1900, no one questioned that war was the be-all and end-all, the arbiter of all final decisions. So war was respected. They marched around, the proud tower, Robert Thurman and so on. And also, people just threw their garbage across, they just threw it out there. Nature was going to take care of it, never mind. So no sense of the environment, and no sense of responsibility about it. And then they thought some big system, some church or some communist revolution or some democracy, some abstract thing, the big Stalin-like buildings was going to take care of it, some big system. And the fourth thing was, I forgot, and religion was passé and sort of naive, and it was good for solace, but it was unrealistic, and the material sciences were going to make paradise out of, like a giant condo of the planet. Everybody living in a jacuzzi, watching TV with 3 girlfriends and boyfriends or whatever. So he said that was what 1900 was like. And 2000, people realize nobody's really winning these wars. Nobody wins them. The people know this, and they don't want them. And they are worried about the environment and where they throw their garbage, and they realize it has to be restored. Basically, the people know that. And then basically people know it's up to the individual. The system will not take care of it. It will be corrupted and ruined. And then spiritual science is coming out, the science of the soul, the science of controlling. The fact that people go on about we're hardwired humans, and we know that soldiers can be trained on using hatred as a basis to give their life. And then they get some rotten ashes or some old rotten bone gets stuck in Arlington Cemetery, and some moron goes there and puts a flower. Who cares? Useless to them. And so spiritual science means love can cause people to be able to give their life. And people can stand in front of tanks in a good humor. And people can challenge dictators, humorous, with love and friendliness, but forceful resistance. So, human beings are the Buddhist view of nature, that the human form evolved from the animal, is that the human is completely deprogrammable, completely reprogrammable, either good or bad. And so we can be programmed well. We can educate people to be nice, to listen to their wives, to listen to their children. And even me, I can listen. My wife still doesn't accept me as her disciple. So I wanted to. I'm still a novice in that temple. But she says men they basically in their 60s they begin to emerge from adolescence. But there is some hope. That's her slogan. I can see a smile. So world peace to inner peace. So that's, Shantideva teaches how you can overcome hatred and rage and anger and revenge. And you can do that. And that's the warrior, that's the inner warrior.
Yeah, Sure.
The warrior against the inner evil.
And Gandhi did that, and
Gandhi
King did
did
it,
that.
and
Dalai
Mandela
Lama's
did it.
still alive, and that's what
and
my
the Dalai
book,
Lama's
The Life of Dalai Lama, is so crucial to the young people, because he's responding to genocide
Yeah.
with nonviolence. He wants to dialogue with them. He wants to talk to them. You know, just talking. He told me, I was even freaking out the other day. I did an interview with him like about a year and a half ago, and he said, "Oh, just talk to those ISIS people." And I said, "Oh, come here, they'll kill you. They'll cut your head off when you're trying to talk to them." He said, "Well, how can you talk to them?" He said, "Oh, just, take their gun away and then talk to them." And, Kim Jong-un, talk to them.
Definitely talking to him.
Donald Trump, we were going to make a deal. He didn't have like a Trump dictator's mansion with his gold letters on
Trump
it.
Tower of Towers,
Yeah,
yes.
well, he can trade. He can he can put the Jong-un on the building in New York, and then you have a Trump name, and then they both be happy.
You got it
Both be
worked out
happy.
there.
That guy, he doesn't want to commit suicide. That guy, he's not trying to shoot anybody with a nuclear weapon and get Korean the place to obliterate. No way. Look at that hair.
The two hairdos.
The two, that's right. That's right. Two weird hairdo competition. That's what it is. It's the fox hit him on the head. The other one has like something like a ferret or something.
Maybe it's a
So that's where we have to like have a humorous revolution, and a peaceful revolution, and a loving revolution. I think it's possible. And as you know, before Constantine, the crucifix was not worshipped by Christians.
That's right. It was not
Christ the teacher, the strong teacher, powerful person.
Right. The main symbols of Christianity for the first 3 centuries were the Good Shepherd.
Yes.
And the Pisces, the 2 fishes.
Yes.
2 fishes. And the cross was not used until the 4th, 5th century.
Yeah, until the Romans decided they wanted to co-opt Christianity for their imperial behavior.
Right, and a lot of Christians went along with it. And then
And then I think Constantine's mother, I love that James Carroll, I hope you like it.
Yes, I like it.
And Constantine's Sword, if you haven't read that, you should read it. It's really amazing. And the mother went over to Jerusalem and she found some rotten old crucifix somewhere. And said, that's the one. And then they made the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and they got all in like this. But the subliminal message of the crucifix, I always didn't like as a child. That's why I didn't really, why I like Buddhism. Although I love Jesus, I do. But I didn't like it because it looked so uncomfortable. That wasn't his best moment.
Exactly, not at all.
And Mel Gibson, when the guy walks away out of the cave and they roll the rock back, he still looks pissed off. If I was showing the world that they couldn't kill me and I was rising from the dead, and I would look like a Russian icon, all glorious and golden and really happy. You guys, like jab away, it doesn't bother me. I can die and rise again. That's the point. Without that, you're not a Christian. Just because somebody got wasted by some stupid Roman, and then the whole thing, like it was blamed on the Jews. That's ridiculous. That Pontius Pilate guy, and the Gibson movie, Mrs. Pilate comes out with like cowards for Mary.
Let's not give Mel Gibson too much airtime.
No, but that's the paranoid thing.
No, I hear you.
Okay. And what it is it's telling
not
you
just
that if you try to be nice, you'll get wasted. So therefore, onward Christian soldier, let's go conquer the non-Christian.
Yeah.
That's not a good idea.
No,
right?
Very bad idea.
Okay, we're going to come back to the questions. You've kind of already answered some of these, but you've both been admirers of members of your tradition who have gone before you, and you have written extensively about them. Can you describe who those mentors are and the strongest influence these peacemakers had on you?
Mm-hmm. Well, there really are many in my life. I limit to a few. One is, of course, Hildegard of Bingen, this wonderful 12th century Benedictine abbess who was amazing. She was really a Renaissance woman, a genius at music. She also painted marvelous mandalas, and she was a healer, first-class healer, and she wrote over 10 books, including books on science. She also was a tremendous...
Who was that?
Hildegard of Bingen.
Oh, yes.
She was truly prophetic. She took on the emperor, the Pope, told him he was surrounded by evil men and that he should devote himself to justice. Took on abbots, would write abbots, bishops saying that they're drying up. The only sin in life, she said, is drying up. And you're drying up. So go out and do something that'll make you wet and green and moist and juicy, she said. Those are her exact words. Her exact words. And just an amazing human being, and a woman, a liberated woman before her time, you might say. So she certainly has been a tremendous gift in my life. Meister Eckhart, who I've alluded to, he's uncanny. My most recent book, I've done 3 books on him. My most recent book, I put him in the room with different 20th century people. So I put him in the room with Thich Nhat Hanh in one chapter, because he's so Buddhist, Eckhart is. But I put him in the room with Coomaraswamy, because he's also Hindu. And I put him in the room with Rumi and Hafiz, because he's also a Sufi. A Sufi.
Which book is that?
Man, this is called Meister Eckhart, Spiritual Warrior for Our Time. This came out a few years ago. And Jung says he received the key to the unconscious from Eckhart, so I put him in the room with Eckhart. There's a chapter with Jung, a chapter with Adrian Rich, because he's an incredible feminist in the 14th century. He supported the Beguine movement, which was a women's movement in the 14th century, and there's one reason he was condemned by the Pope. But anyway, so Eckhart is unbelievable. But to jump forward, because you're mentioning mentors, I have to mention Père Chenou, this French Dominican who I studied with in Paris, and who's deceased now. I had him in class his last year. He was 75 and he retired from public teaching after that. But he was an amazing man. He's really the grandfather of liberation theology. I remember, I didn't understand the real meaning at the time. It was 1968 I had him in class. But in my class there were about 15 students and about 12 were from Latin America. And of course, he was a big influence on the whole liberation theology movement. He came out of the worker priest movement after the Second World War in France. And essentially that was Marxism, because the unions were definitely Marxist then after the war. And he would sit in the back of the room in these union meetings and just listen. He was the most educated guy in the room. And when it was over, the leader would say, "Father Chenou, what did you hear today?" So he would just feed back what he had heard. And that's really the basis of your of base community theology in Latin America. It's about listening to the people, the poor people, those who are on the front lines and struggling, and create gospel out of that. He was silenced by the Pope Pius XII for 12 years. He was forbidden to write all through the 50s. But in the Second Vatican Council, he was redeemed. He was brought in by a third world bishop, brought him in as his peritus, and he really shined there. He really wrote the most radical document, which is called The Church in the Modern World. It was his basic work. But he was just a wonderful human being, and he was full of humor. He had no bitterness, even though he'd been silenced for 12 years. And the last time I saw him, he was going blind. He was like 91. He died at 95, the day Mandela was released from jail, which I thought was a marvelous moment for him to die. But the very last time I saw him at 91, he put his arm around me like this, and he said, "Never forget, the greatest tragedy in theology of the last 300 years has been the divorce of the theologian from the dancer, the musician, the poet, the potter, and the filmmaker," which is so French to the filmmaker. And
Chenou, C-H-E-N-U.
C-H-E-N-U. C-H-E-N-U.
He's not well known.
No, he's not well known. But I was so blessed to have him as my, and he's the one who named the creation spiritual tradition for me. I'll never forget, it was like scales for my eyes in the middle of class. There's 2 traditions, fall redemption begins with original sin, blah, blah, blah. Then creation spirituality begins with creation, Genesis 1, and is good, and is very good. And of course I translated that later into original blessing. But scales came off my eyes because it informed me of where the dualism came so strong in Christianity, and this preoccupation with suffering and death and all the rest. And to be liberated from that, I realized, and as he pointed out, the creation picture is the oldest tradition. The first authors of the Bible, the J source, were creation-centered. Now all scholars agree that Jesus, historical Jesus, comes from the wisdom tradition of Israel, and that is pure creation spirituality, because the wisdom tradition is not about the book, it's about nature. Many scholars today believe that Jesus was considered illegitimate in his village, so on the Sabbath, he was not allowed in the synagogue. So he went out into nature while everyone else was praying in church, you might say, in the synagogue. And you can see it in all of his stories. They're all about nature. So all this is just added up to my life's work. And it was Merton who sent me to Paris. And that's kind of a funny story because when Dominicans said I could go to Paris and get a doctorate in spirituality, I said, where do I go? And they said, go to Spain. No, I can't go to Spain. Rome for spirituality? You must be kidding. Well, wise guy, where should I said, I don't know, but let me write Merton. So I wrote Merton. They thought I was crazy to write Merton. 4 days later, I got this letter saying, go to Paris. So I went back to them and said, now I know where I have to go. Paris. Paris, they said, we never sent anyone to France or came home again. I said, but Merton said, no, you can't go to Paris. So 3 months back and forth, I got to hit him over the head with Merton's letter. And finally, they relented and let me go to Paris. And then eventually they regretted that I did come home again. Because of what I learned from Chenu in Paris.
Really
so anyway, those are a few of my mentors, Hildegard, Eckhart, and Chenu.
Thank you so much. Bob, how about you?
Well, my mentor, the Geshe Wangyal, 1910 Geshe Wangyal, this Talmudic Mongolian Lama, was a definite mentor of mine. And historically, mentors, I really liked Wittgenstein, the later Wittgenstein. And there's some other people, like Western, Hermann Hesse, I liked him very much. But in my reading, and Buddha, of course. And then when I discovered Buddha, and the more I keep discovering Buddha, it's wonderful. But in the living people, it was the Geshe Wangyal who really became my spiritual father, my initial spiritual father, and sort of made up for all sorts of things, and opened the door to the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism, which are a little different than the Four Paths, but they have those elements all in them. But as we all know, the third noble truth of the Buddha is the discovery of the basic goodness of the universe, of nirvana. That's the only one of the Four Noble Truths that's actual reality. The cause, the symptom of the ignorance, the suffering, and the cause, the ignorance, and then the path to overcome that, education, the Eightfold Path, the three spiritual educations. Those are all in the superficial reality. The bad and good parts of the superficial reality, but the actual reality is only nirvana. They are created. That's always been there. We just don't know that we're there, and it's all fine. It's all perfect. And also, it's not the dissolution of everything. Nirvana is not the dissolving of everything. It's the seeing of everything. It's translucently just all made of this love and compassion. And so it's like as if everything suddenly was made of crystal, and you could see through it, or you could choose to see its individual divisions. It's a thing like that. And so anyway, Geshe Wangyal opened that door for me to my endless and great gratitude and so forth. And then early on, when he took me to the Dalai Lama, His Holiness had me study with His Holiness and I were like fellow students, really, rather. He was a little older, but 4, 5, 6 years older, but he wouldn't answer my questions at all. He would refer me to his teachers. And so Kapchen Lingren Rinpoche especially was a great teacher of mine. And his physician, Ishi Dundan, who taught me Tibetan medicine, was a great teacher of mine. He was really very, very good. And later on, some other lamas, Tara Tulku, a few of them. And then, when His Holiness reached, from 79, when His Holiness reached his sort of full, or 70 actually, which was like 4 or 5 years later when I came back as an ex-monk, and he was really up on the heavy shunyata teaching thing. And then he didn't shift my questions off to senior teachers. He taught wonderfully, beautifully. And then again, 10 years later, when he had come into his own kind of as a meditation and Tantra master, vision of re-envisioning the universe in a certain way. He was amazing, and he's been a mentor ever since. And then in between, sort of between that and thing, I have to say that my wife has been on it. Tremendously has been a great teacher of mine, Nina, my Swedish, half German, half Swedish wife. She's been my Hildegard, whatever, and she's dealt with me like dealing with some like uptight, weirdo, ex-wasp, who's trying to be Buddhist but still has some bad habits. And she points that right out. Lovingly, but forcefully. And there's no doubt that she's an equal mentor than any of these lamas and gurus, etc. She has been, definitely.
Yeah.
And she has introduced me to the fact that, the cool heroes that I write about, the Shantideva does, they are actually the women. They've been bearing these blows and these burdens and doing this unrequited labor at all levels all this time, and they're being all squeezed and crushed between all their weird ego, And they are, and if you redefine enlightenment as compassion, then they have a leg up. They have a handicap, on the males. They really do. Because which male is ready to have another total stranger, by the way, might be an immigrant, might not have a visa, suddenly take up residence in your stomach without paying any rent. No rent. There they are. Which man is going to really deal with that? Excuse me?
There's a reason why in both Hebrew and Arabic the word for compassion comes from the word for womb.
Yes.
Wow.
Sure.
It begins there, interdependence. Huh?
That's right. Oh, Rahim, Rahim.
Exactly.
Yes.
So Matthew.
So she taught me about that, somewhat, although she doesn't consider I really learned it completely.
Does she call herself a Buddhist? Is she a Buddhist?
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Even sometimes, I wonder if I deserve it, but I do. I would be. I feel I have a refuge. We would call it having a refuge. But the great thing about the refuge, which makes you a Buddhist, is the three jewels: Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. But the real refuge of the three is Dharma. And Dharma doesn't just mean doctrine or dogmas or something. Dharma means reality itself. So your real refuge is reality. That's why I have this slogan that I say, Buddhism is realism. And therefore the knowing of realism is bliss. Ignorance is suffering, causes suffering. But knowing reality is bliss. Because, I guess you guys would say, God is reality, real reality. And creation is it's also reality because it's made by that, but in one way, it's a little less real than it's the way we perceive it, based on ignorance, separate ignorance. Is it not? Would you say that?
I wouldn't
We're getting
use that
in deep
language.
water.
I wouldn't use that language. I see the universe as the unfolding and the gradual manifestation
Panentheistically.
right,
Okay.
of the divine. And Vaishnava says God becomes as creatures become.
Okay.
So divinity is in process also, and it is unfolding, kind of revealing itself, even to itself.
Right.
And the news we're getting from science, like that now the universe is 2 trillion galaxies big.
Oh,
that kind
that's
of,
like silly.
kind of.
How can they pretend they know a number?
Well, they've jumped from 300 billion to
I
2
know,
trillion
there's no limit to
in 1 year.
There's no place to land when you jump
No
in that
place.
number.
Anyway, it's really, really big.
Of course.
And yet, Thomas Aquinas says every human being is capax universi, capable of the universe.
Yes.
So that means, hey, we're really big souls. We're big beings that we can even talk about. Is the universe 2 trillion galaxies big? That we can think that or say it.
Sure.
And start painting it or putting it to music. Wow, that might distract us, detour us a lot from war
It might.
and reptilian brain energy,
Yes. It might.
and some peace.
So the Nagarjuna says that there's not an iota of difference between nirvana and samsara. But it's kind of complicated because his formula like that doesn't also completely work. But that's useful in some, as a mental vector of the
Yeah.
inconceivability of reality. So,
Well,
so
you know, Thich Nhat Hanh says that nirvana is the kingdom of God
yeah,
in Western language.
yeah, I think so.
And Krista Stendhal is a great biblical scholar. He said to me one day, you know, every time you see the word basileia, that we translate as kingdom, you could translate it as creation.
Uh-huh.
So
Basileia?
all of creation is basileia.
Uh-huh.
All of creation
Is that
is the
Greek?
presence of God.
Is that Greek?
Yeah, that's the Greek of the New Testament.
Basileia.
Yeah, that we translate as kingdom of God.
But really, it's reality.
Yes.
The reality is the kingdom. It's just what
Okay.
you're saying.
Yes.
And that's why spirituality is about waking up.
Yes.
Like Eckhart says, God is at home as we who've gone out for a walk. See?
Yes.
So returning home and waking up and seeing what's already here. And Jesus said the kingdom, the reality, is already here. He didn't say tomorrow when your bills get paid or your kids graduate or your health is better, or yesterday because we're living in nostalgia.
Right.
It is here. So
It is.
wake up and you know,
Yes.
Be there.